So welcome again. Welcome to the second webinar in the Scottish AI Playbook series. I'm your host for today, Maggie Jesuits from the Scottish AI Alliance. And today we have an excellent guest that I'm super excited to chat with, McKinley Hayden. McKinley is a Director of Data Value and Strategy at the Financial Times and was leading the AI Transformation Program of FT as well. So warm welcome to Mike Hayden. McKinley, hi.
Hi, Maggie. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. It's so good to have you. So I think that it would be maybe helpful for our listeners to talk a little bit about FT itself and the organization. I think all of us sort of, have a good understanding of what it is in terms of being this incredibly well-established newspaper, business newspaper, sort of tenet of business journalism. But there's more than that, isn't there?
Yeah, I think, yeah, as you say, I think, we trade on our reputation. So hopefully the people on this call have heard of us. But we were founded in 1888. We are, our one of our kind of mottos is without fear, without favor. And really our goal as an organization is to empower ambitious individuals and organizations to achieve. And a lot of how we do that is through absolutely sterling, unbiased, high quality, well-researched journalism. And I think that's something that we're very, very proud of, rightfully so. And I think the thing that people don't really know is that despite being kind of a legacy, sort of quasi-luxury brand, I actually think there's sort of the heart of innovation kind of beats within us from our pink walls. We are actually kind of early adopters of technological kind of disruptions and opportunities. So I think we were the first newspaper in Europe, possibly the world, to put up a paywall and change our business model to focus on digital subscriptions. And also, interestingly, we really, I think as far as making big investments in data, we were also really early with that. So I'd say we're a pretty data mature organization at this point, which is not common for a lot of, again, kind of like legacy brands and media companies. So I think we have the right to be sort of proud of actually how innovative we can be despite a relatively traditional business.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role and the role of your team?
Yeah, I love talking about my team. We are small but mighty. So data value and strategy, which sounds like just a kind of combination of buzzwords, but I swear it has significance. Really, the role of the team is to make sure that we are delivering our data and AI strategy. And if you think about kind of a data value funnel, right? Kind of data comes in, is processed and enriched and stored, and then it's transformed, and put into dashboards and insights, and then it's used, right? That last bit, the used part is kind of where my team comes in, because what we've recognized, and I think a lot of organizations are coming to this realization, is that even if you do have amazing data and you have amazing technology and you have amazing teams of data people, it still isn't certain that you will get the kind of value that you want from all those capabilities. Somebody brilliant said recently at a roundtable, most of the time when people are describing data problems, they're actually describing decision problems. And I thought that was such a great way to put it. And that's kind of where my team comes in, is we really are trying to look at, what needs to be different about the organization, whether that's sort of skill sets or, understanding or, role definitions in order to really get value from data. So we're all about adoption, culture, scaling, skills, this kind of stuff.
I think quite often organizations are guilty of maybe collecting too much data just in case something comes out of it, but not actually being able to draw any valuable insights from it.
I think it's a really good point, and I think that's the thing is it's so in my team we have a value methodology which looks to identify where does data add the most value for the organization. Because I completely agree. I think we had a real glut of data collection, over the last like 10 years or so, data-driven decision-making. Data needs to be everywhere. Well, data doesn't need to be everywhere. Data needs to be where it really is going to make a difference. And we need to understand where that is. And so I think that's what my team does. And I think that's kind of the future, actually, of data in general.
Amazing. You've mentioned that FT is quite an innovator and quite an early adopter of technologies. And I know that you've been using AI for quite a long while, even before the latest Gen AI boom.
Yeah, I mean, it's now sort of slightly like pejoratively being called like, oh, traditional AI, which, let's not sniff at traditional AI. It's brilliant.
Absolutely.
It's just so good. And doesn't come with some of the baggage that generative AI does. So yeah, no, we've been using kind of recommendation models and propensity models for probably about 15 years or more. So we've always had kind of certainly as long as I've been at the FT, there's always been a data science function using kind of different types of sort of machine learning, applications and so on. So, but yeah, so I think we probably saw the generative AI boom just a little bit before. I do remember, the director of data science going on about, I think it was in, 2023 or possibly even late 2022, she kept going on about generative AI, and I just kept being like, yeah, whatever. And then boom, 2024, it's like practically January 5th or something, it was everywhere.
It was everywhere. Yes, it was just unleashed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you've been using sort of, as you said, the traditional or narrow AI for quite a while. But I wanted to focus on today's conversation on this moment when you've actually leaned into this this new era, I suppose, of Gen AI. Could you set the scene for us a little bit in terms of how the project started? How did you get on the AI transformation pathway, and what was the why behind it?
So let's start with the why, because that ultimately is the most important question, right? The why. I think for us, the why came from an existentialist crisis, really. I mean, generative AI poses a huge threat to a company like ours and media organizations. And so I think similar to the kind of digital, transformation that happened, 15 years ago, the CEO just really kind of saw the writing on the wall and said, this is something that is incredibly disruptive. We can either be a casualty to it or a leader, and navigate our way through this. And I think that frankly, I think that is probably applicable to more organizations than people realize. But I think for us, it was kind of staring us really in the face from day one. So we knew that it was something that we had to engage with, and not passively, but really, really actively. What I think is sort of fascinating is so that's kind of that first bit. What I think is really interesting is that, again, the kind of nature of our business also led us down the kind of responsible AI path. I think we probably would have gone down that way anyway because of, again, the values that we hold for ourselves as an organization. But there is also sort of a commercial imperative to it. So again, we trade on trust. We trade on integrity. And all it takes is one well-publicized slip-up from a journalist trying to just cut some corners, to then potentially our revenues would really, erode because people say, well, oh, the FT, I pay a lot of money for my FT subscription and you're telling me that this is written by robots? No, thank you. I mean, you can see how that would be potentially really devastating. So I think from the very first moment that AI was really introduced at scale, generative, I'll say AI, and for the most, I'll say traditional AI when I mean something that's not generative AI. But from the moment that we decided to focus on scaling AI within the FT, we talked about AI fluency and we talked about responsibility and ethics. And that has been a part of the conversation really from day one. In fact, we had an entire AI policy written and ready to go before we launched all these tools, which I thought for ages was just like standard. Like, of course you would have a policy first, but I am hearing a lot of stories where that is not necessarily the case. And I really, just for anybody listening, I just really, really urge you to have a policy and ideally if you can make it as digestible as possible, that is really ideal, because this is something that everybody is going to need to make day-to-day judgment calls about, and therefore, making those guardrails really clear, and equipping employees with the necessary skills to make the right judgments and keep them and your organization and your customers safe is absolutely fundamental. And so I think we were, because of what we are as an organization and how we trade, those imperatives were just front and center for us.
I suppose when someone talks about or thinks about a policy, it doesn't necessarily jumps as something that's accessible, I suppose, and easy to use, just something that sits on a SharePoint rather, a long document. But I know that this is not the approach that you've taken.
No, and you know what? This is like, I feel like I keep making this point every time I talk about this, is that I almost wish we could use another word other than policy, because I think you're right. I think it has this really kind of like stuffy connotations. The last thing somebody wants to read is an AI policy or anything with the word policy. But actually that's not what this should be. It is something that, again, keeps us safe. There's a metaphor that I heard from an amazing speaker who, unfortunately, I can't recall the name right at the second, but it was through one of the Data Lab community meetups, who talked about governance as being, talking about it being the rails at the Grand Canyon. So if those rails suddenly were just gone, how close would you get to the edge? For me, I wouldn't get anywhere near it. Like, even the thought makes me feel so ill. But once you have those rails, you can get up right to the edge and admire that incredible view. And that's what governance is it allows us to know up until what point are we safe. And it gives us the freedom to take in the view and explore and innovate. And I think we've really got to change this perception around governance. And again, if we just need to use different language, maybe that's the way to do it. But I think if we want to get value at scale from AI, then we have to be comfortable with those rails. And it's really the only way forward.
Absolutely. I love this metaphor, by the way, with the Grand Canyon. And I think it also speaks to the research, around public attitudes around AI, where people are explicitly asking for regulation or asking for guardrails and point this as something that is necessary for them to trust this technology and how it's being deployed.
Absolutely. I think trust. I love that you've used that word. I think that's a really good one. And yeah, I think, how can you really get value from something that you don't trust?
Absolutely. So you've mentioned that you've sort of by default taken the ethical, responsible pathway because that was what aligned with FT's values. I suppose when we talk about ethical or an ethics, AI ethics, it very quickly, goes into the philosophical territory.
Yeah.
How did you sort of explain it and also define it and operationalize it for the purpose of this program?
So it's a really good question, and we're not done with this at all. Just to be clear, this is still very much like a work in progress, and we're always I feel like a lot of my meetings these days get into sort of philosophical territory really quickly. And in a way, I think that's great. Like I think uh philosophy and ethics are, that used to be a requirement if you were going to be a statesperson or statesman, back in antiquity. And I think we should, return these subjects to the fore. They're not just academic. They actually have, they have, um, they have practical applications these days. So, the way that I think again, we've sort of benefited from a rather ethically minded workforce. I mean, really from the beginning, we were asked very like challenging and appropriate questions around ethics, which I think is great, if uncomfortable, because we weren't always sure how to answer them. For example, one of the sort of, early questions was around our sustainability goals. How does, partnering with OpenAI, like, how does that relate to our, carbon emissions and our sustainability objectives as an organization? It's really
Very timely question, absolutely.
it's really tricky, and we are trying to figure that out. And very much anybody who has any thoughts or ideas about that, please do contact me, because we're really trying to speak to the wider community about, how do we address this really, really critical question. And just for anybody who is also interested, there's an MIT article that came out, I think, last week that did sort of the math around the environmental impact for AI, and it's really fascinating. But it just shows how difficult the challenge is. So still one to work on. Around kind of ethics, we built a AI ethics and responsibility framework. Sort of interestingly, it kind of went the other way from the AI policy. So the AI policy was very much optimized for sort of adoption and being digestible and very clear, very succinct, and understandable. Whereas the AI ethics and responsibility framework probably went a bit too comprehensive. Like I mean, you could argue, can you ever be too comprehensive on ethics? But it's a lot. It covers lots of different facets, and it goes into, quite a lot of information about the different sort of scenarios and guidance around how you could choose them. Now, I think that's great, but what we need to figure out is I just don't think many employees will take the time, unfortunately, to go through it all in one go. So one of the things that I am looking to do within my team, in partnership with data governance and legal, is like, how can we experiment and make this stuff a bit more bite-sized and kind of diffuse throughout the organization, so that people can kind of consider these ethical questions sort of as a part of their day-to-day work, and not necessarily as like needing to take time out. Because I think, like so many organizations, like our people are really strapped for time. And it was one of the biggest barriers that we saw when we started the whole transformation program. And we were trying to, we were focusing on AI fluency. And the surveys just came back time and time again. People are just like, I just don't have enough time. So figuring out how to get this stuff where people already are is one of the objectives.
So it really it sounds like you've really brought people on this journey and had a lot of sort of feedback loops that are happening. Can you
Definitely
talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. And I also think, gosh, if anyone's playing a drinking game where they're taking a shot at how, many times I say something is really critical, he'd probably be pretty wasted by now. It all, so much of this is, all plays really critical roles in a very complex endeavor. But I think feedback is important. And interestingly, I think one of the things that some organizations miss out on is examining feelings. So we're we definitely at the beginning when we were embarking on kind of our AI focus on AI fluency, we were looking at usage of tools and what kind of capabilities people had. But actually, we did a big survey that asked, how are people feeling about this? What do you what does it how does are you scared? Are you nervous? Are you excited? Are you what's your sense about this? And that was so critical. Like I really think that if we had not done that pulse check on people's emotions and kind of thoughts about this, I don't think it would have set us up for the success that we had. So particularly because we have our editorial staff. I mean, how do you think the journalists were feeling about
Mhm.
all of this?
I imagine differently than operational business teams.
They sure were. Not everybody. So, but yeah, and I think it's just so important to be able to segment and understand the different kind of thoughts and feelings going on in these different groups, and it allowed us to really tailor our messaging and thinking just much more sensitively. Is like, okay, how do we have a conversation, particularly because it's such a nuanced one, right? It's yeah, and so we can't go in there with like a blunt instrument. So yeah, so we did kind of that initial survey, and we found um a lot of fear and anxiety, but also like some people. We also had a very healthy group of people who were like, "This is so cool." Now those people are also sort of dangerous, right? In a way, like, so it's, but it was great to know where those people were living and how to make sure that, again, they were aware of those guardrails and could, were empowered to experiment, but within a way that kept kind of everybody safe and confident in their responsibilities. So, and likewise, addressing some of the fear in the organization was critical. We have to adopt a different approach with editorial for various reasons. But even where we saw pockets of fear in other groups, one of the things that we did was kind of try to inject a bit of fun. So we did this mascot competition, which I really thought, this is so stupid. Like, this is so stupid. Like, we're not a bunch of high school students. We are FT professionals. We're all adults. Like, this is dumb. But
the mascot for the program or for FT?
For the FT, yeah. So the challenge was to go and use ChatGPT, and we had some training and some guidance, and then we had like a public repository of all the submissions, and I kept the opinion to myself, but I really thought like, oh, it just seems a bit silly. And I kid you not, the thing had been live for like 10 minutes when, two colleagues of mine like sent me they were like, oh, look what I've done. And there I was making a mascot. And I think it really, and we saw in, when we kind of resurveyed, we found that, something like that just put down the baggage for a minute and just said, hey, let's all just have a little bit of fun here and just at least like explore this tool. Because I think we had a lot of people who just didn't even want to cross the threshold. And doing something like that was really fruitful. And I think at least kind of got people invited into the room, which once they're there, then you can educate them and, have a dialogue about, a more sort of impactful and, again, responsible way to use this stuff. But just getting people into the room was critical. And that was something that I didn't think was going to work, or I didn't think it was going to have much impact, but actually had a really great impact. It's worth noting, though, that was only one aspect of a larger, like, week-long program that we called Global AI Immersion Week, which allowed for kind of internal talks, really respected members of the FT coming and kind of sharing some of their observations or like early wins that they'd had, but also talking about some of the questions, like how do you sort of navigate some of these gray areas and stuff. And just, again, you talked about, trust. It's just kind of making people feel some trust that we are trying as an organization to do the right thing, and in the right way. And even though we're being upfront about the fact that we don't always know what that is, that we are really dedicated to trying, and making that clear for people.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I suppose there's a fine line with a lot of extremities here, isn't there, in terms of the opportunities that are sort of often blown out of the proportion, the hype, and also the costs and the harms that are often very real for not just organizations but also societies as a whole. That's a huge thing to grapple with. How do you feel that you've walked that fine line at FT?
I mean, I think we are really trying to use our position in the world to have influence where we can. I mean, our various board members are actively campaigning to make sure that we can establish licensing agreements and kind of copyright protection, because at the moment, some of these tools are just scraping our stuff. I mean, and there's not much we can do about it. I think you can see voices from creators all around the world crying out and saying, this is not okay for this to be set up this way. And yes, you can say, oh well, that's just you trying to protect your margins and so on and so forth. I mean, yes, that is true, but there is something that is larger at stake. And so I think it can both be true that we are trying to protect our revenue, and that we are also fighting for something that is a public good, and something worth fighting for. I also think a lot of our content, is written around trying to expose some of these societal impacts, and from a range of really high quality journalists trying to hold these organizations to account and call BS where appropriate. I mean, that is the purpose of media. I mean, again, that goes back to what I'm saying. This is worth fighting for, is that, we are the fourth estate, and we, in theory, through integrity and high quality journalism, we hold systems of power to account. And, that's why I really shudder at the idea of, OpenAI being a custodian to something like that. That really gives me the ick in a real substantial way. I don't think that is the future for society that I would really buy into. So I think a combination of trying to be that leading voice, but also living out that voice. We can't be out there talking about fair AI policies and practices and responsibility and ethics and humanity, right? Like, the focus is on humans, not necessarily technology, and not be living that internally. So I really think we do everything we can to kind of talk the talk and walk the walk. And that's hard, but it's worth doing.
Absolutely. And I think that it's important also the work that it just underlines the importance of the work that you've talked about in terms of recognizing that people, yes, are employees with an organization, but also we all live in a wider society, and all of that has a wider impact. And we cannot just leave it out the door and sort of, focus on our task without acknowledging those wider consequences.
I think that's the thing, is and I think that's why, when we talk about AI, we are talking about humanity, really. And that's why I think I'm so happy to be here now. And I try to be an active voice in the community, because I do want, yes, the FT has had a probably more obvious kind of existentialist crisis as a result of AI. But again, I think that we are all facing into this as individuals and organizations in one way or another. And the choices that we make now will have will have ramifications for years to come. I was thinking about it the other day about like fast fashion. Imagine, we had this like window right before, all of these like fashion, I can't even say it, fast fashion companies became prolific, before we had, like entire continents of like disused clothes, cluttering our ecosystem. There was a moment in time which maybe we could have just stopped and said, is this what we want? Like, are we okay with this? Is a 5 pound white t-shirt like, really worth this cost? And we didn't, because we didn't know how to. We couldn't. But I feel like we are in this increasingly like narrowing window before like AI transforms our world, where we can and we have to ask the question, like, what is the world that we want to be building? Because our actions now will determine that.
Totally, I couldn't agree more. You've we've talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to get back to that because I think that a lot of organizations are still, unfortunately, sort of, on the FOMO wave, and also feel threatened if they don't, I suppose, get on board the AI train because of all the competition, all the narrative that it's necessary. But what would be your advice in terms of where to start and how to approach this and how to tackle this narrative?
Oh man, do you know, the thing is, like so the hype wave is substantial. I mean, it is really, it's overwhelming. We were talking just before this webinar started about how overwhelming it is these days, about the amount of information and just knowing what's important. So I completely relate to this sense. However, we're in a period of sort of unprecedented technological change and innovation. So I'm only just 39, and I've already 39 yesterday. Woo! I have already lived through like the digital transformation and an AI transformation. So that I think that puts us in a good spot where actually we can be a little bit more skeptical about the hype because we've seen things come and go. Uh, data mesh, big data. Remember big data being a thing? Big data. Now if you say big data in a room, everybody will laugh at you. But that was like the big thing, 15 years ago, whatever it was. So we've seen these things come and go. I'm not trying to say that AI is going to come and go. I think it is here to stay in one way or the other. But there's a fantastic piece, I think, by Martin Wolf, potentially at the FT. But it talks about, all of these great sort of technical innovations that actually didn't end up really having much of an impact. I mean, even the internet, by one report, created no additional productivity. I mean, I think that's kind of fascinating. Maybe we're just watching too many cat videos. So I think that we have a lot of evidence. Google Glass. The where did that go? Nobody wanted to wear that stupid thing on their face. So I think we have lots of evidence of brilliant technological advances that don't actually end up having a huge amount of impact. So I think we need to prepare ourselves to cast a critical eye and think to ourselves like, okay, it is very possible that AI will not actually have as much impact as everyone is sort of saying it will. So I think, therefore, the best refuge is, frankly, in really sort of basic and maybe even boring like management principles. Go back to, Porter's 5 forces or, a simple SWOT analysis of like, okay, what is your organization there to do? How does it do it? Strengths, weaknesses, what are the, customer expectations? What's the competitive landscape? And then, try to put what and then get somebody who can, help who's got a really, really good understanding of AI, not just the technical aspects, but sort of like its uses, its applications to come and help guide and create some of these scenarios. I think that's your, retreating to sort of best business practices is really is the only way to navigate this, because otherwise you're just swallowing the nonsense coming from the tech companies. And I'm sorry, a lot of it is absolute nonsense. Like they are doing what they are incentivized to do, right? Which is capitalize on this big hype. Assuming they can capitalize, which is a big question. And likewise, I think the technophobes and the naysayers, that's another extreme voice that also we have to be cautious of. The truth is somewhere in the middle. And the only way, I think, for organizations to really navigate the ship through those murky waters is to go back to kind of business basics, and take a structured, strategic approach.
It's amazing. Absolutely. Speaking of impact, I was wondering if you could shed a little bit more light in terms of how do you actually measure impact of the AI transformation program? What sort of data are you looking at? Where do you get it from, and how is it going?
It's a great question. So we've been collecting data from lots of different sources. It's a continuous bugbear that these tech companies that are telling us they're going to change the world, they can't even often provide adequate usage data. I mean, we're getting emails and with spreadsheets, and you just think, wow, okay. So I'm just putting that out there. So we definitely do have things like that, but we've been looking at kind of AI fluency rates and things like that. Again, sort of anecdotal evidence. We're still trying to judge thoughts and feelings, how those are changing. And we've been collecting case studies for now over a year, which we kind of house in our AI hub on our intranet. We have recently started working on a AI impact framework. And so we collected some of the biggest departments from across the FT and asked everybody to give us, between kind of 8 to 15 of their kind of biggest use cases for AI. And then from there, we generated kind of an impact categories. So I'm going to try to see if I can do these off my head. You've got efficiency, new capability, skill, quality improvement, cost reduction, and incremental revenue would be the categories that we've identified. And then we've tried to sort of t-shirt size them, small, medium, large, extra large. Look at whether the value is being released now or in the future, is it kind of a planned thing? And is the primary beneficiary FT employees versus FT customers and readers? And so we then kind of mapped everything across those categories, and we've seen, perhaps not unsurprisingly, although I guess I was a little surprised, that it was almost evenly split between efficiency as a value and new capability, new skill set.
Okay.
Yeah, which I think is
how do you define a new capability to new skill set?
So that's a good question. We haven't defined them as such, as it's more we kind of know it when we see it. But you're right, we need to define these things. So new capability, new skill set would be an example. We've seen evidence of teams sort of saying for example, we wanted to start, we're starting to create research papers out of our team because we can now, you can sort of generate a draft and then edit it, which but before this technology, you would have had to have somebody start it from scratch, and then it was editing, it was just so laborious. It was really hard to merge different sources together. Now, that of course, again, I want to really emphasize that there's always a human in the loop, because again, you don't want to be producing nonsense. But that that starting draft is strong enough that then, the process of editing and putting it out is then something that can be done. So we're seeing kind of new these kind of like new capabilities, new sort of service, new outputs being able to come from teams that just couldn't have ever, could have ever done it. Or new skill set is like a lot of people have used ChatGPT to like kind of improve their skills. A lot of how we're seeing it is writing. So again, want to be very clear, not anything that's published. This is for non editorial purposes. But we talk a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion at the FT, and so people using ChatGPT to find ways to be more inclusive in their writing or to try different formats in order to appeal, to access like a wider range of people. We have people using it for coaching, like so if they're trying to improve a skill. So even things like around management practice, like how to have difficult conversations. We're seeing people using ChatGPT for, to improve some of those skill sets. So those are the things that we're kind of putting into that category.
Was there any particular use case or case study that was particularly exciting or for yourself or
within that category, or just mean in general?
Just in general.
I think a lot of them are really, really interesting. I personally really love AskFT, which is our FT Professional, which is our B2B business. They worked with Anthropic to create a model using about 12 years of FT journalism. And you can now go and sort of have a conversation with the FT. So instead of using our woeful search engine, and I'm so sorry, I feel so bad to all my amazing colleagues who probably work on the search function, but I just think it's like, it takes me forever to find something. But if you go to AskFT, you can have this kind of great conversation in the sort of FT voice around particular topics. And I just think it's such a fantastic use case because, again, it's highlighting what our strength is, which is our expertise in our journalism and our sort of personality as a brand. And I think it's been executed so beautifully. And I think it shows where, a lovely combination of, of the technology, but still staying true to what your value as an organization is and kind of what your identity is. And I think that's, I think I would love to see something like AskFT, go gangbusters and have people coming to us specifically for that experience. I think, and we'll see, maybe they will.
On that note, we actually have a comment of one of our listeners who says, I'm very impressed with the AskFT AI chatbot that was launched to subscribers. And I'm wondering what policy consideration were made in the development and deployment of this service. What role can user feedback on AskFT play in the development of your AI policy?
Oh, amazing. Really great question. So I wasn't a part of the team, so I would have to get some specifics. I'd have to go chat to a few people. Given that it was one of our, I think it is the kind of biggest generative AI kind of customer facing product. I know that legal and compliance and data governance were pretty heavily involved. There was so much testing to make sure that it was, it was of a certain standard. So I know that was something that occupied everybody's time. And so it was really, there is still a process by which to review how it's working and the model and making sure that it is still like keeping to those high levels of standards. And we have quite a lot of documentation about that review process and adherence to policy and so on. So I think that's very much above board. The role of user feedback on AskFT. So we collect a lot of user feedback all the time. And in fact, I think we used a slightly different methodology for AskFT. Um, so I think it was like buttons kind of on site, which we don't always do because frankly they're considered like a little day class setting. It's we keep hearing from editorial like, oh, we're not BuzzFeed, and it's like, no, I get it, but it's also kind of helpful to get more sort of real time interaction. So that's a fight that we kind of, or a professional disagreement that we frequently have. But for AskFT, we did ask for kind of more real time feedback, and we report on that. And so there's someone kind of monitoring that all the time and just making sure that 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 is sort of feeding into what we're seeing. And in general, all of our products use a lot of user research to be evolved or decommissioned and so on. So I'd say that's a big part of it, kind of how we do things generally, is speak to our users.
We have another question that is actually about the staff survey that we've talked about at the start of the project. What methodology questions were used to dig into how people are actually using AI tools versus the intended usages of the organization?
I'm sorry, I got distracted by some of the questions. Can you say that again? No worries.
What methodology questions were used to dig into how people were actually using AI tools versus the intended usages of the organization? I believe that's around, that we use AI in certain ways that not necessarily maybe are disclosed or aligned with how the organization wants us to use it.
Okay, so how are we ask? So
What was the methodology behind the questions?
yeah. Um, so I guess there's sort of different, we've asked this kind of question in lots of different ways. So there's sort of different methodologies. And the way we did it for the impact measurement is we utilized the AI cross-company task force. So as part of the larger AI transformation program, we've got this amazing task force where you've got focus area reps that basically run sort of a little squad that are looking at advancing goals that align to our AI principles. So, for example, like trusted journalism, fluency, tools and automation, that kind of stuff. And then we have departmental reps that are sort of a two-way conduit for the AI transformation and then their departments. And so we actually hosted a workshop and kind of laid out what we were trying to achieve. And we gave people a bit of warning about this and a bit of context, but trying to figure out what sort of impact this is having. We want to make a proposal to the board on how we can track impact, but we've kind of got to give them something first, right? Otherwise it's very conceptual. And so we did this workshop where kind of in real time, we had people putting in these use cases, and asking some questions about what was appropriate, what wasn't. And that's how we sort of collected this bank of data to do our impact assessment. So that's kind of one methodology we've used, but we do kind of lots of different outreach through various different surveys. And so the methodology kind of differs depending on who we're asking, what we're asking, and so on and so forth. But I think at all times what we're trying to do is go beyond just usage. Like that's such a small sliver of information, and it's like, what are you like? What's the result of it? How do you feel about it? How confident are you? And how compliant are you? Which is still an area that is so hard to measure, and one that we're trying to figure out is like, how do we know? I guess it goes back to that question of like, the intended use is like, how can you tell how compliant our organization is being around AI? And it's tricky.
definitely something that was on my mind. One of the questions I had was, you've mentioned those incredible guardrails that you have in policy and principles, but how are they actually enforced? That sounds like it's a tricky thing to do.
It is tricky. It is tricky, but we're still fighting the good fight. And that's, it's the best you can do.
Absolutely. And then share your learnings with everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, there's one last thing that I wanted to ask you, which is about agentic AI. We haven't touched on that. We've spoken mostly about Gen AI, but obviously agents a big topic right now, sort of um, dominating the AI conversation right now. How are you using agents? Are you building agents? What are your thoughts in FT context, but also beyond?
I feel like I should say the thing that I'm sort of the more professional thing, but I'm going to just say something that I personally feel right now, and just note I'm not representing the views of FT right now. This is how I, McKinley Hayden, feel. But like, I find the agentic AI thing like so tedious because, like, can you imagine like your friend who is like driving this really like stupid basic car, and crashing into everything. And imagine that person then saying, "Oh, mate, I'm gonna get this like Ferrari, and it's gonna be great." I mean, that would be so silly, wouldn't it? And I just feel like the conversations around agentic AI like make me feel like we're in that scenario. Is like we are still some organizations don't even have traditional AI. And now we're just, and again, it goes back to what we were talking about with the hype cycle is like, I think that this is just another way that some of these organizations can make us feel like we're missing out, and that if we don't adopt things immediately, we're just going to be so left behind. And I just think it is, I just don't think that that is a fair assessment. I think agentic AI is a really, I can see it having some applications. I think we are probably a ways away from it being actually useful. Um, it is already, it is not, agents are not good at going to multiple sites, and that is where they would be helpful. So like, even if anyone has tried to order groceries using an agent, it's not like, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I think it's a bit patchy. And if we're going to just, you know, displace our entire workforce with this, it's just not nearly good enough. I mean, I think we should be mindful of it and be watching for places where it is working, and like in all things, new, starting small, and seeing what the effects are before we adopt things full scale. But I frankly think it is right now a big distraction. I would just urge everybody to, again, go back to those business basics, take a step back, try to, plug your ears a little bit from the techno babble, and just focus on those kind of first principles of your organization.
Right. And the very final question that we've asked also our previous speakers, what is it one thing that you're excited about AI? I know you're very attuned to the concerns, but just to finish on a positive note.
I think one thing that I'm excited about is that it's, and for all my skepticism and some of my fears, I think there is a lot, like, I have a lot of hope. And I think that what I'm excited about is to see, I hope, humanity rise to this challenge. Like, I think the thing that interests me about AI transformation is less about the technology and more about what it says about our humanity. Mm-hmm. And that fascinates me. That is just something that really motivates me. I want to understand what makes us human and what makes us tick. It's such a precious thing. And I think that we will, this whole period will reveal to us those kind of weird and wonderful, and probably in some ways also less wonderful ways that, that we are these creatures and these societies and these groups. And I'm fascinated to see what we learn about ourselves. And again, and and what we fight for and what we stand for.
Like a great thing. That to end on. Thank you so very much, McKinley, for this conversation. It was amazing
pleasure.
to have you here. Thank you. It was absolute pleasure.
Oh, and thank you for having me.
For all of our listeners, if you'd like to know more about the AI transformation program that AskFT went through, please check our website. We have a very detailed case study prepared by McKinley that we're so grateful for. And you'll get more details there. And thank you for joining us. And I'll see you on the next webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.